Dear participants, we are here again in our fourth meeting of our colloquium on portable X-ray fluorescence that is organized by the Global Portable pXRF network and the European Academy of Science and Arts, the STEMAC expert group. For our academy, this is a follow-up of a specialized section of the successful colloquia Arts Meets Science. We would like to invite you also to contact us to present your own topics in the future that you are dealing with in your activities on one of the coming colloquia. Myself and Michaela wish to express our gratitude again to Doris Klida and to Keelie for their immense technical help in organizing this colloquia. Today, I see once more our president, Professor Klaus Meiser, is with us, and I wish first to invite him to greet today's colloquium. Klaus.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Ioannis. Dear members of the European Academy of Sciences and Arts, and dear colleagues and friends, as president of this academy, it is again my pleasure to welcome you to this colloquia series on portable X-ray fluorescence. I thank again the organizers for the arrangement of the two talks, and I must say, I learn a lot of intercultural relationship by your research every evening of these colloquia. Last weekend, I was in Canton, the old traditional trade center in the south of China, near Hong Kong, in Chinese called nowadays Guangzhou. They have a fantastic museum of old China in Guangzhou in a huge modern building with ancient ceramics and lithics. I'm convinced that all the data they presented in that museum could not have been analyzed without modern measurement technology in archaeology. For me, it is amazing to realize the intercultural similarity of the cultural artifacts in China, pottery in South America, prehistoric Africa, the Near East, and Greece. At my flight home from China to Germany, my aircraft was flying over many of these different pre-cultural regions, and a little bit tired, I was dreaming of these old times. As mathematician, I understood that all these scientific discoveries could not be determined without exact measurements methods such as X-ray fluorescence. As philosopher, I realized the great similarity of these archaeological relics at different locations. And I understood that these different people belonged to the same mankind. These common roots of us lead to the, I think, immensely important idea of a common world today with more tolerance and peace. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Klaus. Thank you very much. Today we have two speakers, Patrick Quinn from the Institute of Archaeology, University of College London, and Clive Bonsall, Professor Emeritus of the University of Edinburgh. I would like to ask Michaela, if you could please greet as well today colloquium, and also invite Patrick as a first speaker.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. And thank you, Ioannis, for all the preparation work you do and all the time you invest in this colloquium. It's a pleasure to introduce Patrick Quinn. He is one of the leading experts in the field of ceramic analysis, and many of us know him, especially from his publication on petrography. But he's worked in a variety of fields, areas, and on very, very fascinating different kinds of ceramic materials. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Geology and Geography and a Master of Science in Industrial Micropaleontology. I hope I spoke that right. It's a really bad word. He also has a PhD in archaeological ceramics and is currently at the University College London. He coordinates there what I find very fascinating, a research network on archaeomaterials, and he also teaches very interesting lectures and a lot of great sessions on ceramics analysis, which many of us have attended. I won't take any more of his time, but would like to ask Patrick to start with his presentation right away and take us somewhere very fascinating.
Thanks, Michaela. Thanks, Ioannis. Thanks, Klaus. Hello, everyone. Let me just try and share my screen.
You can do it.
Yeah, I can. I hope. Here we are. I hope you can see it. Everything okay?
It looks perfect.
Yep, everything.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for having me. It's great. I've been to I went to something in Berlin in 2015 about pXRF, and I haven't been to any meetings or talks focused on it for a while. But as you can see, we've been dabbling with using them in for analyzing ceramics for about 10 years now. So I'll be sharing what we've been up to with you in a very linear fashion through my sort of history of using the machine at UCL, and me and my colleagues and students. And you can tell me what we've been doing wrong. Now I see some familiar names in the attendees, and some of you have been mentioned in here, so I've had lots of help along the way. So let me get started. Well, as Michaela said, I do work mostly on ceramic petrography. This is a book I wrote in 2013. That's my language. I like looking down the microscope. And I was at Sheffield, University of Sheffield in the 90s, trained in the 90s. And we didn't have geochemistry. We had petrography mostly. We collaborated with Anno and we'll see on here, and Vasily Kilikoglu and people from Demokritos Research Reactor as an old picture, where we got the geochemistry done for our projects. And so I was excited in 2011, not to leave Sheffield, but to join. Oh, hold on. Here's an example of a publication where a collaboration between Sheffield with petrography and chemistry with provided NAA by Demokritos. See Vasilis on there. But then I was excited to move to UCL because they had geochemical facilities in 2011. So that's where I still am. Unfortunately, we had this awful machine, and the Spectro, I'm sure it was good at one point, the XLab 2000. The name of it in 2011, if 2000 sounded modern, then it must have been made a long time ago in the 90s, some point, or the 80s. And it was a bit of a beast. And so I didn't know anything really about geochemistry at that point. And so it was a bit of a setback. We didn't have the money to buy a new machine. I went to Spectro headquarters in Germany and tried to learn about XRF. I learned a bit, but I couldn't get this thing going. It hadn't been, well, I couldn't get it producing decent data. It's a very old machine. So luckily we had pXRF machines. Oops, one back. We had pXRF. So that's how I got started using pXRF. Around the same time, Thilo Reren, my boss at the time, or leader of my group, said to me, "Do you want to work on the Terracotta Army?" And obviously my answer was yes. So that sort of sharpened my interest in pXRF. We worked with petrography on the Terracotta Army. This is a publication from 2017. Got some samples and prepared them out in China, small fragments of the warriors and other related ceramics, and published this paper and found some interesting things. But really I wanted to look at whole statues, and so I was dreaming of analyzing those. There is a study using NAA. I don't know how they got the samples, but these days getting lots of samples and certainly analyzing complete warriors destructively is of course impossible. So pXRF seemed to be an approach that we could apply in this area. My colleague Marcus Martin Torres and Janice Lee here as well on here, Shujin Lee and Andy Bevan were using pXRF to look at bronze arrowheads at the site, so non-destructively with an Olympus. I think it was an Olympus Alpha or Beta. It was one that I'm not familiar with, but a very old one. And then we bought an Olympus Delta machine in 2011. I got a grant for that, and then so we thought, right, we'll apply it to the Terracotta Army. It took a long time to get the permission, but in the meantime, I was aware of the bad press that pXRF was getting. This paper everyone is probably familiar with, and there were several such critiques of the approach. So we wanted to apply it in the best way that we could. And I didn't really know I knew a little bit about trying to recalibrate the data after you've collected it. And so I saw another paper around a similar time, Detlef's paper. He's on listening as well, and approached him to see if he could try and apply if he could get our pXRF to calibrate it using his method, using spiked clay standards with just one element varying and not so many interfering elements. And so we got him in to try and see what he could do with our Olympus machine. He was using I'm going to say a Bruker at the time. So he got to know the Olympus and made some visits to UCL. And yeah, took a lot of the detailed physics and mathematics off my plate, because I wasn't quite ready for that time, and probably still not. Well, as I mentioned, we had at that point and still have Olympus Delta Premium with several modes, but the one of interest we were using is the soil mode. But Detlev's approach we're collecting data with the soil mode with 2 beams. Oh no, hold on. I think with just beam 2, 120 seconds. It's detailed in the Terracotta Army paper that you'll see in a minute. And analyzing his spiked clay standards, and then he developed in the calibration and the deconvolution routine, and so get me a set of instructions to follow. This is a screenshot from his paper showing in black the good correlation between the given and counts values counted for the spiked clay standards. Unfortunately, this is a bit of a fuzzy screenshot, but this is me following his instructions in Artax and deconvoluting the data. To check the efficiency of it, so that it improved the performance of the soil mode that comes with the machine, we analyzed certified reference materials. These are ones that Detlef supplied in with mylar film or polypropylene film and powdered in these cuvettes, and still got these of various standards with trace element values in them. So to check it, and it did improve it. I'm not going to say it vastly improved the accuracy. These are the details of the standards, not everything fitted on the screen. So that's 14 standards. And one of which we've used quite a lot to monitor the pXRF has been SAM 69, quite a common standard used in geochemistry of ceramics. So it did improve the performance of the machine. Detlef gave us some great tips on how to analyze samples. Obvious things I'll touch on later on that probably are quite obvious to you, but we came up with a protocol of how to analyze ceramics at UCL with our machine and how to calibrate the data, and it afforded some improvements for some elements. In total, hold on, there were, I think, 14 elements, no, 16 elements in total analyzed via the calibration. Even though it didn't vastly improve some of them, what we wanted to do was to pacify readers of our articles, to show them we've tried to use it as best as we can, because pXRF, in my opinion, still has limitations. but you want to show that you're using it as best as you can. And with the Terracotta Army, which was my project I was really getting this ready for, there was no way around it. We couldn't take destructive samples for destructive analysis. I took lots of data sets of terracotta, earthenware, ceramics. This is just a pie chart summarizing it, but got the values for the average or the range of values for each element that we're interested in within ceramics by looking at loads of data sets. Democritos things they collected, Missouri data sets that were collected for me on Californian ceramics and so on are terrible EDXRF. But so we looked at the accuracy of the new calibration over that range, not over the whole, full range of the standards, but just the range that corresponds to the values within ceramics. And these are this is an assessment of that calibration that we had several. So this is just one. There were two calibrations that Detlev developed, and we had a low calcium and high calcium one. You can see some elements, copper, pretty bad, but otherwise we found something like 20–25% relative standard, accuracy, relative difference was acceptable. As you can see, some weren't so good. Lead, for example. And so then we started applying that, and I spent 2 nice trips to China. I was able to negotiate getting in, not in the pits right with this close packed rows of warriors, because those only, I think no one's been in since the Queen went in the 70s. No, the Clintons went in, but most dignitaries, the Obamas and Putin and so on, they have to go to this area at the back of pit 1. It's called the conservation area, or nicknamed the VIP area. So I could get among those statues and analyze them. I'm looking at this picture thinking I shouldn't have been analyzing it like that. I didn't knock that one over, by the way, but it is probably irradiating my leg. So there are lots of pictures still. We realized some things through our years of use of the machines about safety, and that would be unsafe use in my opinion. We needed to clean the surfaces of them. There's lots of atmospheric dust. This is my colleague using IPA or alcohol to clean it, ethanol. So I wasn't allowed to do that. They had to clean it, colleagues of mine. And then we put the warriors through this degrading process of firing X-rays at them. That looks like we're shooting him. But we analysed different parts of the head, the robes, the arms of various warriors. That's a robe section, which is particularly flat. So the Terracotta Army were covered with polychrome paint, and you can see a remnant of it, some remnants of it there on those straps, red, the red colour. So we analysed areas where this was still visible. It's mostly disappeared from, apart from new ones that they most recently excavated. They can keep that polychrome on, but a lot of them it's missing. But we analysed the remnant stuff to see what elements were contributing: lead, mercury, calcium, a few elements that we then took out. And you could see that it was, we could analyze some broken surfaces. Some of the statues were not completely reconstructed. And we can see that it's soaked into the paste. There was also a lacquer on it, but that's organic lacquer, it's mostly gone. So we needed to be aware of the potential contaminant elements from the polychrome paint. And this is the paper in archaeometry. PNAS turned it down. I thought it was going to be my PNAS paper because of the impact of it. We put it in archaeometry in the end. Quite happy with it. One thing we were interested in these statues in the VIP area, there's like several hundred. Some of them have got these stamps that says gong at the bottom of the robe in the center of the screen there, and the others have got an inscription scratched in them that says Shanyang. And these are thought to be 2 workshops that produce warriors for the mausoleum, First Emperor's mausoleum complex. And I think people are fairly certain about that, but there's not much proper evidence. And so we wanted to see whether we could see that geochemically, whether the clay was different. Another thing we looked at was in terms of, so the project was looking at the labor organization, organization of production and logistics and so on. And we wanted to, there's a theory that the the warriors were made with they had lots of arms, lots of heads, lots of bodies, and then they assembled them. And if that was the case, you'd expect to be chemical differences potentially between the body, arms, legs, because they might have been made with different batches of clay, or maybe even by different workshops. So we compared that. On the right here, you can see that the different components. We also analysed terracotta horses, as you can see. They've got quite a distribution in terms of the chemical composition. This is PCA, of course. And then also on the bottom left, a single statue, that's what those symbols are fairly restricted within this. These are all the analyses we took. The single statue is more or less concentrated in a particular area of the plot, which suggests that the different components are chemically different or varied, and a single warrior has got less variation. So this seems to agree with an alternative model, which is that a single group of craftsmen made a single warrior in a cell, what's called a cellular production system, from a batch of clay. So that was some support for that. In terms of the relationship, the chemical about the Gong and Shanyang warriors, we found, center of your screen, that PCA with the averaged values, a definite chemical difference between the Gong in yellow squares and the Shanyang in blue triangles. And that was particularly visible in terms of rubidium and strontium. So it was first evidence, real evidence that these are probably different workshops using slightly different clay. We couldn't thin section them. The actual and the samples that we thin sectioned before didn't have stamps, or we weren't sure exactly whether they were from the Gong or Shanyang groups. So, but probably a slightly different clay source, and maybe made in a slightly different place. Anyway, this is not a talk about the Terracotta Army, but that's clearly the most high-profile application of it by our group. There can't be more famous ceramics than those. And so we hope to go back and do some more. There are lots of warriors that don't have stamps, and so potentially COVID put a stop to traveling out there for a while. And so we need to get back and analyze ones that aren't stamped to see which workshop they were produced with. There are other types of warriors, and we were able, if you want to read the paper, you have to decide which workshop made those. And we made a theory about it being a multi-vendor project, about its logistics and supply chain management that's where we took it, the interpretation. Anyway, since Detlev was a co-author on that previous paper, we've applied it to various with our Delta machine and his calibration to lots of projects. PhD, when this one's recently come out, Lozada Mendieta on ceramics from the Orinoco. Another one on Uganda that's not yet published. I think it's going to come out quite soon. And in this case, basing a whole PhD at that time anyway, this was a few years ago, as the main geochemical technique for collecting geochemical data, comparing that with petrography, I think raised a few eyebrows. So, and I wanted to. So what we did was we then, and this is showing that she got really good groupings with pXRF. Is we compared I think there've been 3 PhDs where we used it, and so far, and another 2 coming, we have always compared it with another technique. So sent a few samples elsewhere, in this case ICP, another one, the Fitch Laboratories WD-XRF, to compare. So a subset of the samples that we've analysed with pXRF, we've analysed with invasive, more accurate, higher quality techniques, though we don't assume that, we want to check it, and found a good correlation. So we've tried to, again, protect ourselves, or make sure that we've done it as best as we can. Belts and braces. There's a master's project. We've had quite a few masters which we've used pXRF for. And another one, this was in Iraq, and then in Africa. We recently followed up on that, which I'll mention later on, and found good groupings, good good agreement with petrography. Let me just work out which one it is, but I think D, those are the petrographic fabrics. And we can see two chemical groups within the ones which are the black dots. So the chemistry has showed us extra information we didn't see in petrography, as well as agreeing with it for other groupings. So it's worked well in these projects, and obviously students can use pXRF themselves. This one is not on pXRF, but this from this PhD, this chap Alessandro Ceccarelli, he was working in India and he couldn't take samples back. So what he did was he ground them to powders there. So he did destructive pXRF using our machine and the calibration that developed for us. So we have done some destructive pXRF, put them into sample cups, cuvettes. So during COVID, as everyone experienced, from one day to the next, you had to up and leave your office. I took with me a pXRF, not one that had the calibration, but another delta that we had at that time, and took it home. And this is in my loft, and so I collected lots of, where I am sitting now, it's changed a bit. I collected lots of data for students. So I grabbed loads of ceramics as I left, and I grabbed a pXRF, and I already had a microscope at home. So I had my own office set up. This was my office during COVID, or my own lab, I should say. It's an office and a lab. And you can see me collecting pXRF data there. And I sent the data to students who then, working at home, could analyze it. People who had samples sent me samples. I shipped ceramics to have thin sections made in Los Angeles. It had to be inventive during COVID, of course. And pXRF was really useful. And this is a dolia, I think it's called, a huge Roman storage jar. So sampling one of those thick sherds to get a broken surface. We tried to obviously clean the surfaces with sandpaper or with a Dremel tool, depending upon how dirty they are. Can't really do it with glazes, but slips you can burr off. With this undecorated ceramic, I've just used a chisel. That seems a bit like vandalous, but couldn't think of any other way of doing it. These big thick sherds, and so we've got a fairly flat surface to analyze. Of course, we analyze several spots and average that where we can. These are all the standard things I'm sure you apply. That's my lab now. The pXRF has gone back, but I had to move into the loft and then gradually renovate it. This is a silly plot. But I collected so much data. I spent several hundred hours collecting pXRF data in my attic for students. And this is just a silly plot of all the data together from different parts of the world. But you can see a lot of data was collected. We always monitor things. So I was using this Psalm 69 standard to monitor the performance of the machine, or sorry, the precision of the machines, looking for drift. Someone from Vanta, Duncan, I think, made some plots based upon this. He was looking at this is our Vanta now, but we did the same with the Delta. But some elements were stable over time, other ones changing to do with drift in the machine, as well as the standards absorbing a bit of moisture, I think. So that's something we try to do, always analyze the same standard each time and then keep the data to monitor drift. Probably you do the same. About 2021, I think, we wrote a grant to get some Vantas to upgrade to the Vanta machine, and we've got 4, I think, that are just like this. I think that's exactly what we've got. We've got that stand, and then the thing on top, slightly small, the chamber for some of those sherds, but we've enjoyed it so far. Never really got it to work on our computers, to sync with the computers like the Delta, but probably our problem. So what did we do this? Well, when we bought some new machines, we can't use that calibration that Detlev kindly developed for us, and we obviously paid for. So we needed to start afresh. And so what we did was, what we're doing now is we're recalibrating the data after collection. We're using the 3-beam geochem mode. It's got silica on it, which is good. The Delta soil didn't, so silica's useful. Obviously it's a common element, but it's nice to see it. And what we did was compared with set of standards, same ones you saw before, plus some other ones, the measured versus the certified. Some argument about whether it should be the other way around, the axes. A colleague and I keep on debating. We went with this way around and did linear regression to work out a recalibration coefficient. We had a second set of standards that we then used to test that. Student was doing a PhD on Inca ceramics from Chile under my direction, developed this. And so, yeah, it's been used already in published studies. This is with the Vanta. There's a study which I've mentioned on lithics from Iberia, which is which he helped with the recalibration, but in progress. Lots of things in progress. But then some projects where we started using the delta and the depth level recalibration, which is what we call it. We need to still use that machine, so we've still got it and we use it occasionally. And this is Jebel Moya in Sudan. I showed you a study before where we used that, and so we got the old machine because we want to use the same calibration. If I get back to the Terracotta Army to analyze those, I'll need to pull out that machine as well. So that's an issue, is keeping these machines that have got bespoke calibrations around, keeping them working. If the detector needs to be replaced, then the calibration, I believe, is not valid anymore. So there's an issue with longevity with that, but luckily no one has lost. They've gone, one of them went missing on an airport in a flight once. They've been all over the world, literally the four corners of the globe, but this one is luckily still alive. It's been the one that we've used here, it's been used on glass, stained glass window, and there's a calibration for that, which is also valuable, so we don't want to lose it. This is that paper, and we could compare our previously detected chemical groups with the black squares and circles with new samples from the same site, and we're going to work on figurines from that site in Cambridge hopefully soon. And so again, we'll pull out that machine. So we've got machines for specific purposes, and that's not the most ideal situation, but that's the way it has to be, particularly if you want portable devices to take into museums, like I mentioned, analyze figurines that we won't get permission to destructively sample. These are all great benefits of pXRF, as you are all aware. Looking at potassium rubidium ratio here, and found some subgroups with geochemistry of these granite derived, this ceramics made from granite derived material in Sudan. I've used it for some commercial work. I do commercial analysis, mostly petrography in Britain, but occasionally I do some pXRF, and at Westminster Abbey, the Queen's Church, we analysed these remains of Renaissance sculptures that were found behind a window. You can see a foot on the far left there, and this corpus of material, which is a mystery to the Abbey, how it came about, possibly Italian Renaissance sculptor who came over to London to work for Henry VII. And so we used pXRF and as well as thin sections to try and find out which pieces go together, as well as look into their possible origin when they're made in Florence and transported, most likely made in London. So there's been some commercial applications to commercial projects, and that's going to get published soon as well. I did in the topic, in the title, it said about stones. There's only going to be a quick mention of that, and a project that I mentioned, that there's a study on Iberian stone axes, green stone axes, very fine grained, very valuable, things you can't destructively sample. And a PhD student has been going to many museums in Iberia looking at those and using pXRF for that. And also, unpublished so far, but a study of flint, very silica-rich material with only traces of other elements, but she was able to find some useful patterning in it. So pXRF's fairly unexplored in terms of flint. These are pyramidal stone anchors at the Piraeus Archaeological Museum in Athens, and they're 4th to 5th century BC. I can't see the top of my screen. but anyway, 4th to 5th century BC, and Greek ships traveling within the Aegean and into the Adriatic, and a particular strange type, and we're interested in their sources. You can see some, the light coloured ones are clearly different, made of limestone, but they're this porphyritic volcanic material. The one on the far left is vesicular volcanic, and so we're looking. One thing because we can't destructively analyze them, we're using pXRF and visual analysis, and I've analyzed similar, morphologically similar ones in Italy, and found that they're chemically similar, and so probably got the same source, compared their morphology and so on.
Sorry,
I've been doing.
what are the holes for?
That's a big question. Probably not a traditional stock, but probably a wooden stock that's then ropes are tied onto to hang it from the bow of the ship. And there are quite a few papers written on this. What's his name? Dimitri Kokomilis, for example. What was her name? Honor Frost studied these famously, was interested in these, and we got funding from the Honor Frost Foundation. But yeah, a very interesting set of anchors, quite atypical, but not a stock. The hole's not a stock for a stock. This project I tried to do sustainably without flying, and so this is me en route. This is Patras going back to Bari on the ferry. I got a train to Patras, to Bari, and then across to Patras. So pXRF has been great because you can see my rucksack there, and so the pXRF's in there wrapped up, and you can see my stand. So because that's portable, I can take it out there and move around. I've gone down to Italy to analyze some, so it's had its benefits in that respect. It's me analyzing them. Well, we have got quite a big lab at UCL, and it's recently been upgraded. In the last 4 years, we've got an ICP-MS. You can only see part of it on the far right above the bell jar desiccator thing, but we've got an ICP, an LA ICP-MS now, and so in a way we can do bulk geochemistry again. We can do proper bulk geochemistry again. We've of course got SEMs, you can see on there as ice, for microanalysis, micro geochemistry, but for proper bulk geochemistry of trace elements, we've got LA ICP-MS now. So what's the future of pXRF? And we're also looking to get a fairly small desktop EDXRF, maybe this one, for high throughput analysis for students. And so will we be using pXRF? Definitely. We'll be using it for projects where we need to take it into the field or analyze objects which are too small to be analyzed as destructive analysis, where we can go into museums. We'll be taking it hopefully back to the Terracotta Army, be analyzing their non-portable things. So it's definitely got a place, but this should be good for ceramics that we can grind up to powders, put into little cuvettes, and collect fairly okay data, which we can. We sent them samples to test actually, and a few other companies. They're getting better, obviously not as good as WD, but we probably will go down that route and then use the LA ICP-MS for more detailed analysis of certain samples. So 10 years on, my book has been updated, and I've added geochemistry to it. I've learned quite a lot, probably made some mistakes along the way, and look forward to hearing your comments in terms of how we've been using it. But you can see the pXRF on there and one of the terracotta warriors. But sadly, there are some people who still have a rather lowly opinion of pXRF, and I recently got a review from one of them about a study, and that they quite clearly seem to see the word pXRF and assume that the data is poor quality, even though we outlined how we tried to get around that. So yeah, all these years later, it's probably 20 years we've had pXRF. I certainly remember early studies like Yuval Goran's one of the tablets in 2011 or 2010. It's been a long time, but I'm speaking to the converted here. So thanks for listening. This is some other uses of our machine, a possible Shakespeare painting, and they found it somewhere in the UK. I loaned it to a colleague who took it. I believe that's in our lab. It is. I wasn't there that day. So couldn't do that destructively. And thanks for listening. Just want to thank James Parker from Olympus, Evident, Brett Duncan, who did those to the drift for us, Detlev for his input into the recalibration. And this is a pXRF that died on us that we put in an X-ray machine. It looks nice, doesn't it? Thanks for listening.
Mm.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
You're welcome.
Ioannis, you're
Very
still
nice.
muted. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much for this illuminating lecture and pinpointing also various issues, thorns in the method. Otherwise, this is one of the reasons, humbly I say that, with the global pXRF network we have formed, thanks to Michaela that initiated this group, in order to advance somehow, not qualitative, but on a quantitative manner, using the more modern techniques and having the experience of so many years of the pXRF. Now I would like to introduce the second speaker, which is Clive Bonsall. Clive comes from my alma mater, University of Edinburgh, studied prehistory and archaeology at Sheffield University with late Colin Renfrew, Paul Mellars and Andrew Fleming. Soon after graduation, he took up a junior research post at the British Museum, moving to a lectureship in Edinburgh in 1978. After promotion to senior lecturer and then reader, he was awarded a personal chair in early prehistory in 2009. His research focuses on the post-glacial hunting-gathering Mesolithic and early farming Neolithic societies of Britain and continental Europe. Early in his career, he excavated Mesolithic sites in northern England, but since 1990s, his field archaeology has been mainly west of Scotland and southeast of Europe. Amongst the many publications, famous are the Mesolithic in Europe, 1989, the books, The Human Use of Caves, 1997, The Iron Gates in Prehistory, Submerged Prehistory, and more. He has many affiliations in Romania, in Bulgaria, in Balkan areas where he was doing his main, research. A member of many editorial board in many journals, and his current research interest is transition from hunting and gathering to farming of the most important events in prehistory. Much of his research has been spent investigating when and how this change came about in different parts in Europe. And this has involved fieldwork studies in the western Scotland, in the Adriatic, Iron Gates of the Danube, and on the border of Romania and Serbia, and together with scientific analysis of archaeological materials to determine the age of the sites. Dear Clive, the online podium is yours.
Okay, thank you, Ioannis. I'm trying to share my screen. Is it working?
Let us see.
It doesn't seem to be working.
Not now.
No.
Something is
Yes.
happening. We can see the presentation and the notes.
Yeah, but you shouldn't see that. It's got the my notes. Share. Wait a minute. Okay, how about that?
Waiting for something to happen.
Yes,
Just as good as before.
Yeah, what I can see on my screen, I'm looking at the screen you should be seeing, and all I'm seeing are your photographs or your images.
It's okay. It's okay.
But we still
What is
see
okay?
your notes.
Oh.
If you don't want that, you might need to change something.
Okay, well, I don't know where the share comes in now. I've lost that. Back to the meeting. So what can you see?
A black screen in the moment.
A blank screen, and you can't see that.
Maybe you stop the screen sharing and then start it new, selecting.
Stop the share.
Yes.
All right. Yeah, your my screen too is when I was hoping to display this. Let me try that again.
Oh, these are our participants, huh?
No,
We still see the notes.
you can still see the notes. Well, that's a bit unfortunate. Okay, well, we're going to have to do it. I'm going to have to do it without the notes. So just a minute. So I want to this.
Yeah.
There, you've got it now. Okay, you've got it now.
Well, for me, it's gone now. Now there's
it's
no screen sharing anymore.
No screen sharing anymore. Okay,
No.
let's try that. Something's not working here.
Yes.
Now it's
That's
good.
good.
Okay, now.
Yeah.
The first slide.
First slide.
Yes.
Okay, wait a minute. Right, that should be okay now. You should see.
Now we see all your notes again.
Oh, you shouldn't see that. Wait a minute.
No,
Yeah.
you did it earlier.
Yeah, but it's not working very well.
I think you can just leave it.
Well,
Now we see just the
I'll have to take
presentation.
our presenter view, I think, and do it without the notes. So if I use presenter view, what can you see now?
Now we see the notes again. Before we just saw your
Okay, I'm
presentation.
going to have to cut that off. Just a minute. Where are we? I don't even know where I am on this. Wait a minute. Oh, somebody better tell me how to cut off presenter view.
Now we would see just the first slide.
Just the first slide, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, now. Yes.
Right. I'm gonna do it without the notes.
Sorry.
That's what I'm supposed to be saying. Okay, so my main use of XRF is to look at obsidian, which is very common in the kinds of sites that I look at in Europe. And mainly what I do is to study obsidian. Now, everybody knows, I hope, that obsidian is a volcanic glass which forms at the edges of volcanic lava flows or igneous intrusions where the temperature cools rapidly, so you don't get crystalline structure. Now, in Europe, the main sources of obsidian that were used in prehistory are really those in the Aegean basin here, primarily from the island of Melos, and in the central Mediterranean, where there are several volcanic islands which provided obsidian in that area. And the main mainland source of obsidian is a number of sources on the edge of the Carpathian Mountains in Central Europe. But those are not the only sources of obsidian in Europe. But everybody thinks that's the only stuff you get in Europe in terms of obsidian. That's not the case. There is obsidian in the Massif Central of France, but it's not been shown yet to have been used in prehistory. It's certainly not been found archaeologically. But down in southern Spain, there is a source of obsidian at Carboneros on the southern coast of Spain, which was used in the area shown by the ellipse here. I don't know if you can see my pointer down here. And that was used beginning in the Upper Paleolithic and continuing through into the Neolithic. And then we have volcanic glasses that are strictly speaking not obsidian, but look very like obsidian. And the main ones are what is called pitchstone. And pitchstone, the main sources of pitchstone, are actually in the British Isles, in the northwestern part of the British Isles. I think if you look at this slide here, this is pitchstone from the Isle of Arran in Western Scotland, and it looks very like obsidian. I'm sure that to prehistoric peoples, they probably wouldn't have been aware of the difference between pitchstone and obsidian. The main difference between pitchstone and obsidian is that pitchstone has a higher water content, which affects its fracture properties to some extent. But the pitchstone that you find up here in northwestern Britain is very much older than the obsidian sources that we see in the Mediterranean in the Carpathians. It dates back to about 60-65 million years. But like obsidian, it was distributed from the source on Arran up here over a very large area, particularly in the Neolithic. Largely confined to Arran in the Mesolithic, and then with the arrival of the first farmers in Britain, it starts to be distributed over hundreds of kilometers in northern Britain. Now, why was obsidian important? Well, it was important because of its conchoidal fracture, hardness. It was a good material to produce napstone tools. So that's one sense in which it was important. But more than that, it possessed two qualities that made it particularly attractive. One was its visual beauty, and the other was its rarity. And you get, if you look at, here's a slide on the left of the famous Chalcolithic necropolis at Varna in eastern Bulgaria on the Black Sea, and you can see all the desirable items deposited in this grave, gold, greenstone axes, copper, and also obsidian blades and blades made of high quality flint. So it was more than just a material for making napstone tools. Now, as archaeologists studying obsidian, we're interested in which sources supplied the obsidian to archaeological sites on which we found the obsidian. And the other thing we're interested in is to try and understand how the obsidian got there. Now, each obsidian source, and it's only called a source if it has a unique geochemical fingerprint. Now, lots of techniques have been applied to the study of, lots of techniques and characterization techniques have been applied to the study of obsidian over decades now. Mainly they were laboratory techniques, but there's a list here on the left-hand part of the slide. But most of these techniques are destructive. They damage. Certainly they would damage archaeological objects. It's not important when you're looking at geological specimens, but museum curators are not happy if you damage their obsidian artifacts. And one of the few techniques which is not damaging is, of course, pXRF. And obsidian characterization studies have become very much easier by the introduction of portable XRF analyzers. And I think the earliest portable XRF analyzers came on stream in the 1990s, so over 30 years ago, I think, and we've gone through several generations of pXRF technology since then. Now, anybody involved in this type of research needs some way of checking the results that are produced by the instrument and of calibrating the instrument. Well, there are two ways to do that. One is to use a dedicated obsidian calibration set like Ellery Fram's Peabody Yale reference obsidians. So these are 35 obsidians from different parts of the world, different, each one chemically distinct. And so Ellery Fram has had these analyzed by high-end techniques like neutron activation and ICP-MS. And so we know the chemical compositions of all these obsidian reference standards. And simply a matter of taking measurements on these with a portable XRF analyzer, and the one I use is an Olympus Fanta M, and then comparing the results against the known values. The problem with that is, of course, you can't keep, you need to keep checking the instrument every now and then, because you get instrumental drift with pXRF analyzers or with any XRF machine as the excitation source ages. So the other way of doing is to develop your own calibration, which you can do very easily by getting hold of standard reference materials, rocks of known chemical composition, provided by organizations like the US Geological Survey, the British Geological Survey, etc. And typically you would buy these rocks ground into fine powder, and then from that you can make press pellets, or you can melt the powder, the rock, and make a glass bead or a fused bead. And fused beads are a perfectly good substitute for obsidian. You just need a lot of them. You need 20, 30 or so to produce a good calibration for a portable XRF instrument. Now, early work on characterization of obsidians was done by the late Colin Renfrew and colleagues back in the 1960s. Renfrew looked at Near Eastern obsidians and Aegean obsidians in archaeological sites and geological occurrences. The first characterization work on Carpathian obsidians was done by Olwyn Williams Thorpe and John Mandris in the 1970s. And they identified several chemically distinct sources in the Carpathians. Now, what we're looking at in this slide is a map produced by Katalin Biro from the Hungarian National Museum back in the early 1980s, I think. It's not actually come from one of her publications, but it's a simplified version I got from a different publication. But basically what Biro showed by plotting out archaeological sites, here are the sources in yellow, archaeological sites are the black dots. She showed that Carpathian obsidian was distributed from the geological sources over quite big distances. So this is a 500-kilometer radius circle, and you can see that most of the obsidian is in that 500-kilometer radius, but it extends almost twice that distance, 1,000 kilometers, up into the Danish islands, and down here into northern Greece, you find the odd piece of Carpathian obsidian. So it was distributed over huge distances. Now, Carpathian obsidian, we know, was started to be used very early in prehistory. You find it on lower Paleolithic sites in Central and Eastern Europe, and it continued to be used through the Middle, Upper Paleolithic, the Mesolithic, and then the Neolithic and beyond. But the interesting thing that you find is that, of course, we now know from DNA analysis that early farmers in Europe emanated from Anatolia and the Aegean and migrated into Europe. And they retained much of their Anatolian genetic ancestry in the course of spreading through Europe, although they occasionally interbred with indigenous Mesolithic hunter-gatherers. But the interesting thing is that although the earliest farmers in Europe originated in Anatolia, where there's plenty of obsidian, we don't see much evidence of them bringing that obsidian with them. So they were getting their obsidian from European sources. And as the Neolithic developed, you know, and we're talking about the period from, say, 6,200 through to 5,000 Cal BC, we see developing in Southeastern Europe distinct culture areas or interaction spheres within Europe. And one of the interesting things is in each of these different interaction spheres, the Aegean, the Balkan interaction sphere, and the Central Mediterranean interaction spheres, they're using a particular type of obsidian from particular sources. So in the Aegean interaction sphere, the obsidian is coming mainly from Milos. In the Central Mediterranean, it's coming mainly from those 4 islands, Lipari, Sardinia, etc. And in the Balkan interaction sphere here, the obsidian is coming almost exclusively from the Carpathians. Now, it's remarkable. I find that quite remarkable, and it's puzzling. It exercises your mind how that comes about. But it's not just obsidian that was being used like that. In each of these interaction spheres, we find a different form of high quality flint. So in the Central Mediterranean, the main source of high quality flint or chert is coming from the Gargano Peninsula on the east coast of Italy. In the Balkan interaction sphere, it's coming mainly from northern Bulgaria, the so-called Balkan flint in northern Bulgaria. So now, work done by Williams Thorpe and others in the Carpathians shows that there are 3 main source areas there, which are called Carpathian 1, which is in Slovakia, Carpathian 2, which is in Hungary, and Carpathian 3, which is in the Transcaucasian part of Ukraine. But you're probably talking about an area about 50 or 70 kilometers here. And you can see, I hope. Now, to some extent, you can separate these 3 source areas, or obsidian from these 3 source areas, by the appearance of the obsidian. This is Carpathian 1. It's highly translucent, and you can see flow banding, and it's very much the nicest of the Carpathian obsidians. And in the Neolithic, it was preferred to the other forms of obsidian. Carpathian 2 obsidian from Hungary is nowhere near as translucent. It's kind of semi-translucent. And Carpathian 3 is almost non-translucent, except in very, very, very thin pieces. And it doesn't have such a nice fracture as the others. Now, I need to move that to one side, so maybe I can do that. Right. Now, when we look at the Mediterranean sources of obsidian, they're mainly primary sources. They're mainly lava flows or volcaniclastic deposits. That's not the case with Carpathian obsidian. There are primary sources of obsidian in the Carpathians, but most exposures, most outcrops from where obsidian would be collected were secondary sources. And the other important point here is that Carpathian obsidian formed 10 to 15 million years ago, whereas most of those Mediterranean obsidians are younger than 2 million years, and some of them younger than just a few thousand years. So in the Carpathians, everything is pretty much older than 10 million years. And over that time, what has happened is that the obsidian, the original obsidian, has absorbed water from the surrounding environment, and it's been transformed into a rock known as pearlite. And within the pearlite, you can find occasional nodules of unaltered obsidian. So this is a primary source, and this is an artificial cave, a wine cellar created in Vinishki in Slovenia. But sources like this are quite rare in the Carpathians. What happens is that this pearlite, with its obsidian nodules or pearls, then gets weathered or eroded to produce colluvial or alluvial occurrences of obsidian. And in this case, where you get alluvial occurrences of obsidian, you've always got the possibility that obsidian from two different sources, chemically distinct sources, can get mixed together. And that's something which and I think many people didn't appreciate before I got the opportunity to go and collect obsidian from this particular region. Now, so Williams-Thorpe and Nandrich identified Carpathian-1 obsidian in Slovakia, and they identified two chemically distinct types of obsidian in Hungary, which they call Carpathian 2A and 2B, C2A and 2B. They knew about the Ukrainian source of obsidian, but they didn't study it. So, and it's not particularly important outside the Ukraine. Now, there was a paper published in the journal Antiquity, in the old Antiquity Project Gallery. If anybody can remember that, you have to be donkey's years old to remember the Antiquity Project Gallery. But it was a short paper by Corinne Rosania and colleagues revisiting Carpathian obsidian. So they basically, starting from Olwyn, Williams-Thorpe and Nandrich's work, they came up with a more elaborate division of Carpathian obsidian sources. Now, this is the original, one of the original graphs from Rosania et al.'s paper, and this is my simplified version where I've done away with the individual points representing individual measurements on individual pieces of obsidian, and just left us with these 90% confidence ellipses, which this particular group were fond of, right? Which shows basically the main chemical types that they identified. So we had Williams-Thorpe identifying Carpathian 2A and 2B and Carpathian 1, and these authors made a more elaborate subdivision in which they divided Carpathian 1 into two subtypes, 1A and 1B, and they also identified and fingerprinted Carpathian 3. And then they identified two more sources, which are not very important because, as far as we know, they're not documented archaeologically. Now, the important thing about the work of Rosania et al. Is that they divided Carpathian 1 obsidian Slovakia into two subgroups, chemically distinct subgroups. Now, because their confidence ellipses overlap to a great extent, most other researchers have not accepted this subdivision of Carpathian 1. And particularly the geologists don't think there are two types of Carpathian 1 obsidian. In fact, there are more than that, as I'm going to show you. Now, in 2019, the International Obsidian Conference came to Hungary and was held in the town of Szarospatak. Szarospatak is here, and midway between the main occurrences of Hungarian obsidian and Slovakian obsidian over here. And so this was an opportunity for everyone who participated in the Szarospatak meeting, because we had 2 or 3 days of field excursions, to collect their own samples of obsidian from the actual sources. We didn't get to visit all the sources, but I got to collect obsidian from 7 or 8 different locations, most of which were chemically distinct. We even got to go into Ukraine and collect from the Carpathian 3 source. So this is my version of Rosania et al.'s bivariate plot of strontium versus zirconium, which you can differentiate the Carpathian obsidians, mainly, well, partly on those two elements. You can differentiate them on other elements as well, but strontium and zirconium are particularly good. Now, this is a graph based on my analyses with the Olympus Fanta M of the samples I collected in 2019. And in some ways, it's very similar to what Rosania and colleagues came up with. So we have Carpathian 3 is very distinct out in Ukraine. The Slovakian obsidians over here and the Hungarian obsidians over here. They're also quite distinct. Now, one thing I don't have, Williamsthorpe and then Rosania and colleagues divided Carpathian 2 in Hungary into 2A and 2B. I do have samples of Carpathian 2A, but not that I collected in 2019. So that's why I haven't filled in that confidence ellipse there. But I collected a lot of 2B. Now, I'm not going to overlap this graph on top of that graph, but I think you can see from the distance between 2A and 2B in my graph that my 2B would fall somewhere over here, if you can see the pointer, to the right of Rosania et al.'s 2B ellipse. So, and other people have noted that Rosania and colleagues' 2B ellipse doesn't really correspond with what they understand as Carpathian 2B. So I don't really know what Rosania and colleagues actually measured, but it wasn't 2B, and that is definitely 2B. It's either part of 2A or it's some other type of obsidian from Hungary, and we need to get to the bottom of that. I can't answer that question at the moment. The other important point that came out of my analysis of the samples I collected is that there is actually a very clear separation between Carpathian 1A and 1B. So I agree with Rosania and colleagues, is they are distinct. Not everybody is convinced, but to me, they're chemically distinct. Now, what we notice here is marked by an S is obsidian from a place called Streda nad Bodrogom in Slovakia. And I only collected a few nodules from there, and they're very, very small nodules. But Streda nad Bodrogom is a secondary source. And geologists were convinced at one time, Slovakian geologists were convinced that this was basically the same as what I call Carpathian 1A from the area of Viničky in Slovakia. But my analyses show that this is quite distinct geochemically. The other thing that tells us it's not Carpathian 1A is that potassium argon dates on that obsidian are significantly older than potassium argon dates on the C1 obsidians. So this is a separate chemical variety of obsidian in Slovakia, which has not yet been documented archaeologically. But we may well in future be able to document it. And then down here, marked with an L, I have two analyses from a primary source near at a place called Lubui Kanyar, which is near Bodrog Keresztúr in Hungary. And this is, from its position in the graph here, is very similar to what Rosania and colleagues called Carpathian 5. So Lubui Kanyar is probably Carpathian 5. If you read Rosania et al.'s paper, they don't actually say where C5 comes from, but it's probably Lubui Kanyar. Now, interesting thing about Lubui Kanyar, it's a primary source. It's one of these, it's a body of perlite with small nodules of surviving obsidian within it. Now, The nodules I was able to collect are probably not really big enough to interest flint knappers or obsidian knappers. And it hasn't yet been documented archaeologically. But the interesting thing about this is that there is an epipaleolithic site 2 or 3 kilometers from Lubui Kanyar, where some of the artifacts were made of perlite. Now, if we can show that that perlite came from Lubui Kanyar, it's the nearest source of it, and if we can examine all the obsidian artifacts from that same site, that's where we might find Lubui Kanyar obsidian. And if we do that, we would have a new Carpathian II source. However, that's for the future. So what's have I learned, or have we learned in this process, is that one of the problems of trying to work with lithotex like that at the Hungarian National Museum and Gerhard Trunker's Vienna lithotac, you don't very often have very precise information on where the samples came from. What we did in 2019 was to take GPS readings at every place we collected obsidian. You can't get that information from the lithotex, unfortunately. And when you do that, then you know exactly where the stuff comes from. Now, regarding terminology, because of the way things have developed, the terms Carpathian I, Carpathian II, and Carpathian III should only be used to refer to the source areas in Slovakia, which is C1, Hungary, C2, and Ukraine, C3. Now, Lubui Kanyar is within the C2 source area. So Rosania et al.'s use of the term C5 needs to be rejected. That's not really very logical. Now, the obsidian from Strelinad Bodrogon may be a subsource within the Carpathian I group, but we would only qualify it as a source and call it C1C or whatever you want to call it if we can find it archaeologically. But basically, people haven't really looked very hard. Now that we've got pXRF analyzers, you can analyze every single piece of obsidian and every single obsidian assemblage from every single site. That was not really the case when we were reliant on laboratory-based instruments. So if we go around this whole area, it'd take an awful long time, but if many people are doing it, and you analyze everything from an archaeological site, then you may well find the Lubui Kanyar obsidian cropping up. It won't be there in great quantity because the nodules are quite small. So anyway, sorry, we'll come back to this. I've gone over that quite quickly, but you can read more about it because this report that I wrote with Slovak geologist Milan Kuhut was published in the Journal of Archaeological Science Reports a couple of days ago. It's open access and you can freely download it, I think, from the JASREP website or whatever website it is, or you can download it from myacademia.edu or ResearchGate pages. Anyway, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Clive. Thank you very much. Michaela, you can lead the end discussions.
All right, thank you. So, are there any questions? Just raise your hand or write in the chat. Yes.
May I?
Yes,
May I ask?
please.
Yes. I would like to ask if there are any indications or facts that suggest that in the different types of obsidian that you observed, there could be a certain communication. First of all, were they all in the same time period or similar time periods? And could there be any evidence to show that there was communication between those areas, people using obsidian?
That's a good question. If we take Carpathian 3 obsidian, that was used very early. This is the poorest quality obsidian. This is the stuff from Ukraine. That was used very early. It was used, started being used in the lower Paleolithic. But it was largely confined to the territory of Ukraine, really confined to a few tens of kilometers around the source. The only time that has been found outside Ukraine is an assemblage I analyzed from an early Upper Paleolithic site in northwest Romania. But that's not too far from the Carpathian 3 source. Of the other Carpathian obsidians, the C2 obsidians from Hungary and the C1 obsidians from Slovakia, they start to be used a bit later in the Middle Paleolithic. The use increases in the Upper Paleolithic and particularly in the Neolithic. So, and it's the early Neolithic that, well, in the Neolithic, it reaches its widest distribution and it spreads an awful long way across Europe. And the interesting thing is, in the Neolithic, if you break down the Neolithic or the early Neolithic into stages, before 5800 Cal BC, and I'm thinking of the Carpathian Basin and the areas surrounding it, before about 5800 BC, you will see a mixture on archaeological sites of Carpathian 2 obsidian from Hungary and Carpathian 1 obsidian from Slovakia. After about 5800 BC, nearly everything you see in Neolithic contexts away from the reasonable distance away from the sources in Hungary is the Slovakian Carpathian 1 obsidian. It doesn't really fully answer your question, I know. But
no, but it's...
Yeah, but you see distinct patterns and you see
Yes.
changes through time.
Thank you. Klaus, you've raised your hand.
Yeah, my question is, I think it's a little bit on the line of the questions of Tassos, because you show these Carpathian distributions of the obsidians, and it was always illustrated on a map with Slovakia, with Hungary, and with Ukraine. And so my question is, what about the ethnic groups in these states today, which are nowadays called Ukraine, Slovakia, and so on? And what kind of ethnic groups are there distributed in that time? I know there was a great change, especially here in Europe, beginning in the just the time after Christ. But what can we know about these ethnical groups which were living there in that regions? In that time, you show these graves with these people with these resources of obsidians, and are there any relations to these people and ethnic groups in correlation with the distribution of these obsidians?
Yeah.
Or is that, or is your consideration only related to the geochemical distribution of these obsidians without correlation to the ethnic groups which are living in that regions?
Well, part of the answer is I haven't really tried to, connect them with ethnic groups, but there have been such big changes in
the meantime,
ethnicity since the Neolithic, that we can't really go by what we see even in the Bronze Age and the Iron Age and beyond.
And also
Yeah,
in
you
sorry.
had the Yamnaya migrations coming in. That was post Varna, and then you had the Slavic migrations and so forth.
Yes, of course.
You know, so it's you could ask the same question of the British Isles. We've received so many immigrants over so many millennia, but
what do we know about the ethnic groups in that time? Of course, I know there were a lot of changes in the last hundreds and thousand years. But in that time, you considered, what do we know about these ethnic groups?
well, if you, I suppose archaeologists would point you to the the cultural record, but whether the cultural record can be matched with the genetic record is a difficult issue, I think. And I'm not an expert on ethnicity. You need somebody like John Chapman here to comment on that.
I have a feeling that Dusan wanted to say something on that. Did you? Dusan? You muted.
Unmute, Dusan, unmute.
Okay, now I managed because I am on the phone and it was a bit complicated.
Okay.
It seems that we all dwell on the same subject. Professor Clive Bonsall, you said that genetic data showed that people mostly did not bring things with them, obsidian. And you also said that it's a rare, beautiful, and useful thing. So somebody would accept that they will take it with them. And is it possible that only poor people actually migrated, like most of them now? Is this a kind of historical fact that people that don't have anything move and people that have something stay in the place where they are?
Well, I suppose it depends how you view farmers. Were farmers poor people?
At that time, probably not.
Yeah, so the farmers migrate because they're, it's demographic growth.
Yeah, but they would need some tools, some sharp tools, or maybe to have some ornaments or something.
Yeah, flint was the main material for making chipstone tools. Obsidian is normally outside the, a small region around the Carpathian source. The amount of Carpathian obsidian you would find in a lithic assemblage is very, very small.
Okay.
You may only find one or two pieces.
The background of my question, I hope is obvious, because as president of the European Academy of Sciences, I want to learn more about the origin of ethnic origin of the different countries which are unified in our academy. Of course, it's a very early time, but anyway, there may be some fruitful hints in that direction.
Yeah, I was very interested in. I'm a medical doctor, so I'm completely far away from that. But I was curious what is going on in these lectures, and it's really fascinating how some technical data, data that came from new technical developments, can shed light to very complex questions.
Thank you. Thank you both for the questions and for the answers. Christina, you have your hand up as well.
Yes, but I'd like to swap to Patrick. Hello, Patrick. I was wondering about, having a calibration set for each material makes totally sense and is super professional, but it is, of course, also a financial craziness, right? If you have a lab where you want to deal with a variety of materials. So do you think we could be able to develop methods where we somehow link materials to with a minimum loss of information maybe? Or I mean, there are some materials that they have similar properties and
you mean like a general calibration?
I doubt there could be a general calibration, because for that the materials are too different, but maybe it would be wise to combine certain things where the loss is not that substantial.
We're using for lithics, we're using the same calibration as ceramics, which is based upon geological standards, mostly of rock, sediment, and so on. So they have a broadly similar chemical composition. Depends upon the type of rock, of course. So limestone's quite different. But yes, in that respect, there's a specific one for glass that we've got, and I can't talk about the metals, but you'll know how whether slag versus other sort of metal can really vary, can't it? If you've got pure metals versus alloys versus slag, which has got all heterogeneous and has got a lot of stuff in it. So there are definitely some methods that can be applied to different sorts of materials. Plaster would need one that deals with high calcium, of course, or on plaster-based materials. But yeah, in terms of cost, it takes a lot of time. But I don't see why. It's getting standards for that you can use to develop calibrations at costs, of course. It's interesting to see the obsidian set that Ellery has made, and we had problems with the flint one, this flint PhD that's now completed, that there weren't great flint standards. So what she did was collected flint in the field, had that analysed in Southampton with ICP, and then she made polished samples. So she made secondary standards. So I think in terms of cost, it might be the investment of obviously time and buying the appropriate CRMs. But yeah, there's some overlap. But you're right that you can't have a what's the term anyway? One size fits all approach to this, and just look at the manufacturer's devices that they have and things suited to particular industrial or applications that we then apply to ceramics. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. But I think this is a discussion worth thinking through how we manage this, because I think the potential of material becomes even more than less. And the more detailed we look at different materials, the more detailed we want our calibration settings. And that's where my question. But yeah, thank you.
But getting something I mentioned about, we analysed a bunch of standards, and then we only, to check the efficiency or the accuracy of the method, we only focused then, and also for the linear regression, we only looked at those standards, those values in the standards that within the range, in the likely range in our target material. We can't be so specific to say ceramics from the Hebrides, whatever. We need to just say ceramics more generally. By the way, I didn't include celadon, porcelain, and so on, stoneware in that, as earthenware, terracotta. So you want it to be specific. You want it to perform with the right matrix and the right elemental ranges, and so combinations of elements. But equally, you have got a point. You can make something so specific you need it for every purpose.
Yes,
thank you.
Just adding to that, it's also a part we're discussing in the network. How can we understand where are which standards, and how can we make it more accessible so people can use what somebody else did? How can we share the sets with the Pyro, for example, or the more standard set, or the bricks? Is already a great start. We also realized I work a lot in the Caucasus and then did a lot in Iraq, that the pottery there, they have so completely different compositions in some of the elements that there is no way that I can really use the same calibration. I need to add the elements I need, which I then need to have some of the pottery from there analyzed, or at least find some spiked samples to refer to Detlef, so I can cover that range. So there might be the possibility to have kind of a basic set, and that needs to be extended wherever you go. Calibrations can build on each other. Jumping in there from a technical point of view, both of the presenters, you mentioned that you should monitor your device and measure the standard again and again. And Patrick, you showed that there was some change for some elements throughout time. So what do you do if that happens? How do you define a point of action? And if there is an action, what do you do? So kind of to both of you, do you have procedures in place? What happens after the monitoring?
I thought odd looked okay, and I've got a huge spreadsheet with them all. But then when we, what was it? I think, yeah, sending it back for repair, and the question of drift came up, and I said, oh, we've got a calibration we've developed for this, so we don't really want it to be recalibrated or to be serviced in that way. And so I sent the data, and it was analysed by Duncan, who used to work for Olympus, and it was him that discovered it. I was assuming that it was to do with absorption of moisture, because these are powdered standards in a sealed cup, but probably some got in there over the years. So yeah, we didn't detect it ourselves, someone else did. Maybe it needs to wait until you send it off to realise. I'll hand over to Clive to comment.
Somebody started screen sharing. Was that planned?
Not me.
No, it's a Lenovo T4.
Yeah, that's mine.
All right.
Sorry for that. Sorry.
No worries. Do you want to stop it, or do you want to show something?
No, I want to stop it.
All right, Doris, can you help?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
Deactivated. Okay.
What is it?
And that's all right. We can go on with the questions.
Sorry.
Clive, do you have a mechanism in place when you register drift in the device?
Clive, I think.
Okay, was that a question to me? Yeah. I mean, you could, you
would only like to say good evening to everybody. Greetings from Georgi Dimirovsky.
Hello.
Thank you. I apologize if I done something wrong.
No worries. We sorted it.
So the point I was going to make is that you could design a set of a calibration set to act as drift monitors, or a drift monitor. But it doesn't have to be 30 or 35 drift monitors, as in the case of Ellery Fram's obsidian calibration set, but half a dozen, and just analyze these, say, every few weeks or months to see if you're getting any systematic change in the measurements that are coming out of the instrument compared to, the elemental concentrations that are in your drift monitor set.
And then if you realize that there's a drift, you would just kind of move the values if it's systematic.
You would basically recalibrate. This is why I prefer to do the calibration afterwards. I don't put calibration factors into the instrument. I always take the raw data from the instrument and then I post-process it and just using simple linear regression. And you can do that, every 6 months or so, if you've got your own calibration set.
What happens then if you have a project that ran through a couple of years? Then you would have kind of different corrections every time if there's a drift. How would you do that? It's just, I'm just interested in the process.
You would have a calibration set.
Yeah.
So those values are fixed, or you assume they're fixed. right? So you know, on day one, you measure your individual calibration samples, right? And you've got a comparison between the instrumental values and the known values. And then on day 180, say, you remeasure, and you may get a slightly different set of instrumental values, but your known values remain the same in your calibration set. And all you do is to redo your calibration if you're post-processing the whole thing.
All right, thank you.
I don't know if I explained that very well, but
Well, I understand the process. It's just coming from projects where we measured through a couple of years, also with breakdowns in the instrument, then trying to figure out which corrections do I apply, how, also taking into consideration that there is a device drift. This was kind of, we can do that with the calibrations, but we need to have kind of a procedure in place because it means something to the objects we have measured on day one in relation to what we measure on day 260. If there is a drift, then if we correct it with the same calibration, it will still keep that drift in the data. And we don't know if the differences we see is really object related or if it's drift related. So that was just kind of the background I was wondering about.
I don't think you need to worry too much because in my experience, drift is very, very small.
I thought so as well. And then I saw the figure that Patrick showed. And for aluminium, there was quite a significant drift that might then evoke groups that weren't there in the beginning based on that. So this was just out of interest because
it hasn't been my experience. I mean, if you are, I think I did try to monitor this over a period of about a year. And if we're thinking of an element like aluminium, which is a major element rather than a trace element. Sorry, like iron, it's a major element rather than a trace element. You know, and you're talking about tens of thousands of ppm, right? This is why people often express it as a percentage. So let's say you've got 10,000 ppm of iron in your sample the first time you measure it, and then you do it 6 months later, you might get 9,995. Well, the difference is negligible. You might get that anyway. May not even be drift. So they're very, very small changes that I've observed over several years of using the same instrument.
I also have a question for Patrick.
Oh, hang on. We have a question in the chat as well.
Sorry.
And I have the feeling that Patrick might have wanted to add something to what Clive said.
Of course.
Did I get that wrong?
I was just going to say we should really maybe be treating these devices like they were a stationary piece of apparatus where you are recalibrating them regularly and monitoring drift. They clearly do drift a bit, but the assumption is often that they're, and that was one argument, the accuracy wasn't great, but the precision is good, and therefore it's internally consistent. But they clearly do drift a bit, and maybe we should be monitoring them as we would do with a stationary piece of equipment. They're sealed and they're small and portable, but if we're wanting to use them like, particularly if you're doing destructive analysis, then trying to use them like other stationary laboratory piece of apparatus, then you maybe need to apply the same principles.
Thank you. There's also a question in the chat for you, Patrick. And Kiran says, could the stone blocks with holes displayed in the presentation be possibly anchors that can be ruled out for some reason, or can that be ruled out for some reason? What did you get out of the pXRF results?
Well, they are definitely anchors. We're quite sure. Do you know, actually, I'm going to retract that. Some of them might be these things that you tie boats up on, what are they called? I forget the name. That you tie a boat to when it's in a harbour, but a portable one. The larger ones, there's larger and smaller ones. But yes, there's something to do with the ship. They've been found with shipwrecks in various parts of the Aegean and Adriatic, so, and in estuaries and so on, old harbours. So we're sure that they're anchors or an anchoring point, even if it was not tossed into the sea, but was on a harbour or on land somewhere to tether the ship to. In terms of the pXRF, yeah, quite clearly a chemical match between things found in Italy, various parts of Italy, and Greece. We're slowly expanding the samples that we're getting access to. We need to get permission for them in Volos in northern Greece, and also in Piraeus and in various parts of Italy. Chemically similar, mineralogically, visibly similar things. So it would have taken me forever to get permission to do destructive analysis on these. Maybe impossible. Though some people drill the base of anchors to get, you could have drilled the base of core, but I think it would have taken too long. So I think quite confidently match them chemically, the samples. One problem is we can't do a total alkali silica diagram because we don't have sodium, but I'm looking for other ways. There is I think you can do it with niobium. There's another element you can use as well to geologically characterize them in terms of the type of igneous rock. But it's worked quite well, and I've done initial field sampling on Egina, which is a possible source of the, what is it? It's like a dacite, andesitic dacite, and found chemical matches. So it's worked pretty well. Yeah, that answers that question.
Thank you. I will watch out if Kidana says something in the chat. Otherwise, he also has some questions to Clive. And I will try to sum them up. So he's wondering if you used other elements besides strontium and zirconium, and if you think that those two would be enough for the comparative purpose, or would there be more information necessary? And he wants to know what you say about the use of ratios of selected elements in provenance studies, regardless of calibration attempts.
As a matter of routine, I use about 12 elements when I'm doing this work. So if you look at the paper in Journal of Archaeological Science reports, we do actually, comment that other elements are good for discriminating between the Carpathian obsidians, particularly yttrium and rubidium. And I think there's one in the actual Journal of Archaeological Science reports paper. There is one graph in which we use the 4 elements as ratios. So, yeah. But what I was, the main point of the paper and the main point of the talk was to compare my results against Rosania et al. And they largely rely on those 2 elements, strontium and zirconium. So yes, but other elements are very useful as well.
Just in regard to that, did you use cross-calibration, or did you try that to match your well use with those of Rosale et al. To directly compare it? Or was it...
Sorry, what kind of calibration did you...
I said cross-calibration. So kind of trying to get your 2 devices methods speak the same language, like calibration with pXRF and a laboratory method, but in this case, your device to their device.
No, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how I would do that. No, I just I just compared their results. They didn't actually quantify their results. They just published graphs.
All right.
So I don't know, what their concentration values are for particular elements in particular samples. Now, we do present all the data in the paper that we have.
Thank you. Patrick, you raised your hand.
I just wanted to say that I've done some great work with pXRF on ceramics with Margie Burton, who's here. And I didn't acknowledge that in my talk, on Chalcolithic and Neolithic ceramics from the Negev Desert and from Jordan. And she also, the person inspired me to look at the anchors, but sadly couldn't come over at the time to analyze it. So hi, Margie.
Thank you. Do I think we have time for Tasso's question, and then we should start to be wrapping up? Now you're muted again. Sorry.
I just wanted to ask Patrick a similar question about the composition of these clay objects that you studied at different parts. Were they very different between them?
If we're talking
Were
about
there
the
any
ceramic,
similarities?
I showed a graph there. I showed a graph where of data I collected during COVID here in my office for student projects, and I plotted lots of ceramic data sets. It's like a plot of, I mean, it's a kind of pointless thing, but I thought it'd be fun. And it shows, yeah, you've got some similarities between ceramics from quite different parts of the world, and then ceramics, say, from that could be in igneous areas, Southern California, and the Andes, where there's a lot of igneous stuff, and then ceramics from the Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean, and other areas where there's lots of calcareous sediments are similar. So there's a variation, and we applied some different calibrations. We had a low calcium, high calcium version.
Were they all for decorative purposes, or works of art like statues or similar things?
The ceramics and the talk were mostly utilitarian pots, undecorated, so we didn't need to remove a slip. Obviously, the statues, the Terracotta Army statues, were decorated ritual. Well, yeah. Anyway, they're statues; they're not utilitarian vessels. Worked on some metallurgical ceramics. The issues there is contamination from the use from smelting and melting, but of course also the ceramics from Westminster Abbey were decorative. Large objects, we've got an issue with homogenization. There we had a lot of blending of two clay sources. We're not sure if it's intentional or not, but then you really need to analyze multiple spots. Clive and Ellery with obsidian, it's very homogeneous, certainly compared to ceramics. And we have got issues, particularly coarse ware pots, and if you don't have enough of it. But this is the same problem for NAA and ICP. So you need to sample enough and then subsample to get your 10 milligrams or whatever you need, 100 milligrams.
Thank you.
But yeah, ceramics similar and different over the world, depending relation to, it's all to do with geology, really.
Thank you very much. Are there any other pressing questions?
Thank you, everybody.
If not, Ioannis, do you want to say the goodbyes?
Okay, thank you very much, everybody, and especially the two esteemed speakers. I think it was a very interesting discussion.